Hey, perceptive Scorpio, around August 23 and 24, 2026, something you have sensed beneath the surface may become harder to ignore. It may not arrive as a dramatic revelation or a moment that changes everything at once. It could be a conversation, a quiet realization, a dream that stays with you, or simply the feeling that you can no longer keep explaining away what your inner world has been trying to tell you. And the emotion that rises may surprise you, because sometimes tears are not signs of pain alone. They come when you finally recognize something you have known for a long time and are ready to stop carrying it in silence. There is a particular kind of strength in the way you observe before you act, Scorpio. You can sit with uncertainty, gather details, read between the lines, and wait until something feels real enough to trust. But that same instinct can sometimes become a form of protection that keeps you holding on long after your heart has already changed. You may have been keeping certain feelings private, not because they do not matter, but because naming them would require you to make a choice. And sometimes the hardest truth is not discovering something new, but admitting that you already know enough. Around this period, pay attention less to the search for an external sign and more to what happens inside you when you stop resisting what you feel. You may notice an old memory returning, a name crossing your mind, a dream revealing an emotion you had pushed aside, or a sudden sense that something from the past no longer has the same hold over you. These moments do not have to be treated as supernatural proof. They can simply become invitations to listen more honestly, especially if you have ever asked God for clarity and then wondered why the answer seemed so quiet. Sometimes clarity does not arrive by shouting. Sometimes it is the feeling that remains after all the distractions have gone still. So pause for a moment and breathe. Notice what your body does when you imagine releasing the need to know exactly how everything will unfold. Notice whether your chest softens, whether your thoughts become quieter, or whether a part of you immediately wants to regain control. That reaction can tell you something important. You do not have to surrender your discernment, and you do not have to believe every feeling that passes through you. But you can learn to distinguish between the voice of intuition and the voice of fear asking for one more piece of evidence. This is where your healing becomes deeper than simply letting go. You are learning to understand what you've been protecting, and whether that protection still serves the person you are becoming. Perhaps you have stayed attached to a situation because uncertainty felt more frightening than familiarity. Perhaps you kept a door half open because closing it would mean accepting that you had changed. Or perhaps you have been waiting for someone else to confirm what you already understood, because their acknowledgement would make the truth easier to carry. But there comes a moment when peace begins with your willingness to believe yourself. If emotions rise around this time, you do not need to treat them as weakness. Let them move through you without immediately turning them into a problem that needs to be solved. You may cry, become unusually quiet, revisit something you thought you had already healed, or feel an unexpected tenderness toward an older version of yourself. That does not mean you are moving backward. It may mean that something buried is finally being given enough room to breathe, and that your relationship with the past is changing from attachment into understanding. For you, transformation is rarely about becoming someone completely different overnight. It is more like water slowly reshaping stone, almost imperceptibly at first, until one day you realize the shape you once knew is no longer the same. The patterns that once helped you survive may not be the patterns you need in order to feel free. You can still be discerning without being guarded, loyal without abandoning yourself, private without becoming emotionally unreachable, and deeply intuitive without allowing fear to make every decision for you. And perhaps that is what makes this period meaningful. Not because August 23rd and 24 must deliver one specific event, but because they can become a point of reflection around something already moving inside you. You may begin to see where you have confused control with safety, where you have mistaken endurance for loyalty, or where you have continued protecting a story simply because it once helped you make sense of your life. What if you no longer needed to hold every answer before taking the next honest step? What if trust could mean allowing yourself to move forward without knowing every detail first? In the quieter spaces, you may find that your intuition speaks differently now. It may not feel dramatic or urgent. It may arrive as a calm knowing, a sentence that keeps returning, a memory that suddenly carries a different meaning, or a sense that your body is finally tired of carrying something your mind has spent too long analyzing. Whatever form that awareness takes, give yourself permission to meet it without immediately judging it. You're not being asked to force a transformation. You're being invited to notice the current that has been moving beneath the surface all along. Because sometimes the first sign that you are healing is simply realizing that you no longer need to fight what you are finally ready to understand. And when that familiar urge to push everything back down returns, meet it with curiosity instead of immediately trying to silence it. Ask yourself, what if this is the moment you stop carrying what was never meant to live inside you forever and begin creating room for your own truth? Let that question stay with you, gently moving for the places where you have learned to stay guarded, because you do not have to earn rest, clarity, or compassion by enduring one more difficult thing. Sometimes the truth does not arrive like a door being thrown open or a dramatic revelation that changes everything in an instant. Sometimes it is quieter than that, more like a current beneath still water, something you have sensed again and again, but were not quite ready to name. And perhaps what you are approaching now is not information you have never known, but something you have carried quietly beneath layers of loyalty, self-protection, memory, and the instinct to remain in control. Through the archetypes of the cards, that inner knowing can be reflected back to you, not as a command and not as proof that every fear was correct, but as an invitation to look more honestly at what you already sense. The High Priestess appears first, and for Scorpio, her presence speaks beautifully to the territory beneath the surface, where intuition and uncertainty can sometimes sound remarkably similar. She does not force an answer from you. She asks you to become still enough to recognize the difference between a quiet knowing and the voice of fear trying to protect you from what you cannot control. That distinction matters. You may have noticed something for a long time, felt a change in someone's energy, sensed that a relationship had shifted, or recognized that a particular pattern no longer felt like you, yet still questioned yourself because acknowledging it would require you to make a different choice. The High Priestess reminds you that discernment is not the same as suspicion, and trusting yourself does not mean believing every thought that passes through your mind. It means becoming honest enough to listen carefully without forcing the answer to be what you hoped for or what you feared. Then comes the Ten of Swords, a card that can look severe when you first encounter it, but beneath its difficult imagery is a powerful invitation to stop repeating what has already exhausted you. For you, this may represent an old way of protecting yourself, keeping emotional distance, preparing for disappointment, replaying conversations needing to understand every hidden motive, or holding tightly to something simply because releasing it would mean admitting that you have changed. The deeper release is not about destroying a part of yourself. It is about recognizing that a survival pattern can outlive the situation that originally required it. So consider the question the Ten of Swords quietly places in front of you. What if letting go is not surrendering your power, but choosing where your power belongs now? What if you no longer need to keep reopening an old wound simply to prove that you remember what happened? There are moments when healing asks you to stop gathering evidence, stop revisiting every detail, and stop waiting for one final piece of information that will somehow make the decision easier. Sometimes peace begins when you realize that you already understand enough to choose differently. And then the star enters with a completely different quality of energy. She does not demand that you become hopeful before you are ready, and she does not promise that everything outside you will suddenly rearrange itself. Instead, she represents the kind of clarity that becomes possible when you are no longer spending all of your energy defending yourself from what might happen next. Her light is quiet, almost like a pale reflection beneath dark water, reminding you that vulnerability can exist without weakness, and that openness can exist without surrendering your boundaries. For you, the star is not simply about receiving what you have wished for. It is about becoming honest enough to recognize what actually nourishes you when fear is no longer making every decision. It asks you to imagine a life where you do not have to chase reassurance, investigate every silence, or prove your value through how much you can endure. The deeper renewal comes when you realize that returning to yourself can be more healing than receiving an explanation from someone else. Together, these three cards create a powerful psychological movement: knowing, releasing, and learning to trust again. The High Priestess asks you to listen beneath the noise. The Ten of Swords asks you to stop carrying what has already completed its purpose, and the Star invites you to inhabit the space that becomes available afterward. This is not about becoming detached from life or pretending that nothing hurt you. It is about becoming less controlled by what once hurt you, so your choices can come from awareness rather than defense. And there is another layer here that matters. Your transformation is not something that happens only in the language of tarot or spirituality. It becomes real through the small decisions you make when no one is watching. Every time you pause before reacting, every time you choose a boundary instead of an old pattern, every time you allow yourself to say, "I don't know yet," rather than forcing certainty, you are changing the relationship you have with your own inner world. This is where reflection becomes self-leadership, where an insight becomes a behavior, and where something once hidden inside you begins to influence the way you actually live. You do not have to call that process a miracle. You can simply recognize it as the moment you stop fighting yourself. There is a quiet kind of power in realizing that you can acknowledge what you feel without immediately acting on it, love someone without abandoning your standards, and remember the past without allowing it to dictate the shape of your future. The path forward may become clearer, not because every question receives an answer, but because you become less dependent on having every answer before you move. That is why those strangely quiet moments can carry so much emotional weight. You may wake in the middle of the night with no obvious reason, listening to your own breathing while a memory, a name, or an unfinished feeling rises into awareness. Rather than treating that experience as proof that something external is happening, consider what your mind may finally have enough quiet to reveal, something you pushed aside during the day, something you have not fully grieved, or something you already understand, but have not yet allowed yourself to accept. Those memories can sometimes involve people who once occupied an important place in your life. They may return through a dream, a passing thought, an old photograph, or simply a feeling you thought had disappeared, but their return does not automatically mean you are meant to reopen that relationship. Sometimes the mind revisits an old door because you are finally strong enough to understand why you needed to close it, and sometimes remembering someone is simply part of remembering who you were when that chapter shaped you. If someone from your past appears again, physically or emotionally, you do not have to decide immediately what it means. You can pause and ask what is actually being stirred inside you: love, grief, longing, guilt, curiosity, unfinished anger, or the desire to finally feel understood. That pause matters because Scorpio's depth can sometimes make emotional intensity feel like instruction, when intensity itself is not always a reason to return. You are allowed to feel something deeply without allowing that feeling to determine what you do next. Letting go, then, does not require you to erase the past or pretend that it did not matter. It can mean remembering without allowing resentment to keep you emotionally tied to what happened, carrying the lesson without carrying the burden, and honoring what was real without insisting that it must remain part of your present. You are not the same person who entered that relationship, trusted that person, tolerated that pattern, or believed that particular version of the story. Something in you has been changing beneath the surface, even during the periods when you thought nothing was moving at all. That growth gives you permission to establish boundaries that would once have felt impossible. It gives you permission to speak more plainly, to protect your peace without turning cold, and to choose a form of love that does not require you to constantly question your own worth. The kind of connection that truly aligns with who you are becoming will not require you to disappear inside it, nor will it ask you to surrender your discernment just to prove that you trust someone. Real intimacy leaves room for two whole people to remain whole. This is also where you may need to soften your grip, not on your standards, but on the stories you have built around what security is supposed to look like. Perhaps you once believed that staying was proof of loyalty, that enduring more made you stronger, or that knowing exactly what another person intended was the only way you could feel safe. Perhaps part of you learned that being prepared for disappointment was wiser than allowing yourself to hope. But what if protection becomes a prison, when you never give yourself permission to experience anything beyond what you can predict? It is okay to admit that you once accepted less than you truly needed. It is okay to recognize that a familiar situation can feel safer than an unfamiliar future, even when the familiar situation is quietly draining you. And it is okay to discover that some of the things you called loyalty were actually fear of beginning again. The deeper question now is not simply whether you can let go, but whether you are willing to trust yourself enough to live without constantly holding the past in place. Sometimes we wait for another person to apologize, explain themselves, acknowledge our pain, or give us permission to leave before we believe we are allowed to move forward. But your healing does not have to depend on receiving the perfect sentence from someone who may never know how deeply they affected you. Silence can sometimes give you information. Distance can sometimes protect what remains tender, and a boundary can sometimes express more self-respect than another attempt to be understood. You're allowed to choose your well-being, even when another person never fully understands your decision. Letting go rarely arrives as one dramatic moment. More often it happens quietly, in the small space between an old reaction and a new choice, when you notice that you no longer need to check, chase, explain, revisit, or prove what you already know. It can be as simple as taking a breath and realizing that you have been holding an emotional door open long after you stopped wanting to walk through it. And in that small release, something inside you begins to make room for a different way of living, one that is still unfolding as you learn what it feels like to trust yourself without needing to control every step ahead. Scorpio, if you've been feeling the quiet urge to delete the number, step back from a connection, or stop pouring your energy into places that leave you feeling smaller, pause with that feeling instead of immediately pushing it away. Around August 23 and 24, 2026, you may find yourself recognizing more clearly what has been moving beneath the surface for a while, especially where trust, attachment, and self-respect are concerned. This doesn't have to mean walking away from love. It can mean walking toward a form of love that allows you to remain fully yourself without hiding your needs or abandoning your boundaries to keep someone close. Take a breath and let that recognition settle into your body before you turn it into a decision. You might say quietly, I release what keeps me bound to what I have outgrown. I choose truth, and I trust myself to follow it. Let those words become less like an affirmation you have to perform and more like an honest acknowledgement of something you are beginning to understand. You do not have to prove that you deserve love, respect, peace, or tenderness. The deeper work is learning to stop questioning your worth whenever someone else fails to recognize it. And just as emotional patterns can reveal where healing is still needed, the same inner shift can begin changing how you approach work, money, security, and your sense of personal value. Around August 23 and 24, this may be less about some dramatic external reward appearing at your door, and more about noticing where your relationship with security has been shaped by fear over control, or the need to have every outcome figured out before you allow yourself to relax. You may begin seeing more clearly which opportunities actually support your values and which ones only appeal to the part of you that is afraid another chance will never come. That distinction matters, Scorpio, because you can be incredibly patient when something matters to you, but patience can sometimes become a way of staying attached long after the situation has stopped nourishing you. If an offer, conversation, professional possibility, or financial decision appears, give yourself enough space to ask what is truly motivating your response. Are you choosing it because it respects your worth and supports the life you are building, or because uncertainty makes you want to secure something before it disappears? The answer may tell you more about your current relationship with abundance than the opportunity itself. Security is not only about what you can hold on to. Sometimes it is also about knowing you can adapt when something changes, knowing you can walk away when the terms no longer honor you, and trusting yourself enough that you don't have to control every variable before you take your next step. You may want to use color or physical surroundings as a simple reminder of that intention, but let the symbolism remain personal rather than treating it as a promise of a particular outcome. Deep water tones, muted silver, burgundy, or even the quiet darkness of a room can represent the kind of inward honesty Scorpio understands well. Clarity doesn't always arrive in bright daylight. Think of this as a reflective practice rather than a ritual you must perform perfectly. Around August 23 and 24, give yourself a few uninterrupted minutes to put down the distractions, breathe slowly, and write about the truth you have sensed, but perhaps have not wanted to name. What are you still trying to control because uncertainty feels unsafe? What attachment are you protecting simply because releasing it would force you to admit that you have changed? And what boundary would become possible if you trusted yourself enough to stop waiting for someone else to give you permission? You might place your hand over your heart as you breathe and repeat something simple. I no longer carry what has already taught me what I needed to learn. I am willing to meet the truth with courage. The purpose is not to cast a spell or force reality to obey your intention. It is to give your nervous system a quiet moment in which your inner understanding can catch up with the decision your deeper self may already be considering, allowing the old tension to loosen without demanding a dramatic breakthrough. When you begin the day, give yourself a moment before reaching for your phone, checking messages, or absorbing everyone else's expectations. That pause is not about discipline or creating a perfect routine. It is about remembering that your first response to the world does not have to come from urgency. Let your feet touch the ground, take one steady breath, and remind yourself, I can meet what comes without abandoning myself. You are not waiting for fate to make every choice for you. You are participating in the way your life unfolds by deciding what deserves your energy and what no longer does. There is something powerful about that kind of readiness. You do not have to rush toward what belongs in your life, and you do not have to chase certainty before trusting your own judgment. Around August 23rd and 24, let the emphasis be on recognition rather than prediction, on noticing the difference between intuition and fear, between genuine loyalty and the habit of enduring too much. What is meant to remain can meet you where you are becoming, while what has only survived through your constant effort may begin to reveal its true place in your life. And if emotion rises during this process, let it move through you without turning it into evidence that something is wrong. Tears can be part of release, but you don't need tears for the healing to be real. And you don't need a dramatic moment to prove that something inside you has changed. Sometimes the deepest transformation feels almost ordinary. You wake up and realize you no longer need the answer you once chased. You stop checking for a message that used to control your mood. Or you notice that your body feels calmer when you imagine choosing yourself. That is a kind of rebirth, Scorpio, but it is a quiet one. You are not becoming someone entirely different. You are becoming less divided between what you know privately and what you continue to tolerate publicly. The patterns beginning to loosen are not being taken from you as punishment, and their disappearance does not mean you failed. It may simply mean that a particular way of protecting yourself, loving someone, pursuing security, or proving your value has completed its purpose. Maybe the freedom you have been searching for was never locked inside another person's apology, another person's recognition, a financial milestone, or a perfect explanation. Maybe it begins when you stop making your peace dependent on receiving something from outside yourself. Around August 23rd and 24, 2026, allow yourself to notice where you are already less willing to betray your own knowing, simply to preserve an attachment, maintain control, or avoid the discomfort of change. So the deeper question becomes, are you willing to take the next step without needing to know exactly where every step after it will lead? Can you move forward without convincing anyone, chasing anyone, or proving that your choice is justified? You don't have to be perfectly fearless. You only have to become honest enough to recognize when fear is asking you to stay somewhere. Your deeper self has already begun to leave. What if the shift you've been waiting for begins with something much quieter than a dramatic sign? What if it is the moment you stop demanding another piece of evidence for something you have already understood through experience? And what if readiness does not mean that every doubt disappears, but that you trust yourself enough to move while the uncertainty is still there? Let that question stay with you as August 23 and 24 unfold. You might write, I am ready to meet the truth without running from it. I release what I cannot control, and I trust myself with what comes next. Let those words be less about claiming a guaranteed destiny and more about recognizing the strength that comes from no longer negotiating against your own well-being. And if someone you care about is moving through a similar season of uncertainty, this message may remind you that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can offer is simply the permission to choose themselves without shame. Scorpio, you were never required to become less sensitive, less discerning, or less deep in order to be loved. What you are learning is subtler. Discernment does not have to become suspicion. Privacy does not have to become isolation, and strength does not have to mean carrying everything alone. The freedom you have been seeking may begin in the moment you trust your own inner ground enough to release what keeps pulling you away from it, allowing the next layer of your life to reveal itself as you continue moving forward.